Okay. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us for this Google Hangout regarding our project grant deadline coming up October 1st. That's a 5 p.m. deadline. I'm just going to keep saying that. 5 p.m. deadline, October 1st.
5 p.m. Eastern.
Eastern, thank you. My name is Scott Winship. I'm the Director of Grant-Making Programs here at New Music USA. I'm joined by my colleagues Sam Rising and Kristen Deering. Hangout is going to be primarily looking at the project form itself and going over some of the most frequently asked questions, as well as fielding whatever questions you have that come up. If you have questions, you should type them here if you're logged in, and we'll do it. If you're not logged in to Google, send us your questions to info@newmusicusa.org using the subject Google Hangout question, and we will fold those into the conversation as well. We're monitoring both platforms, so we'll be able to do that. Yeah.
Just keep going.
All right. This session, first, I'm going to start and go over just elements of the guidelines and the review criteria, and then we'll jump into the forms themselves and sort of talk through some tips and things to think about as you're filling out your project. So we'll be taking questions along the way, and then we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, afterwards to answer any questions you have as we go along. We'll try to do the best we can to stay on top of it. With that, I'm going to jump into a few things about the guidelines.
Sure. And let me share that.
Yeah, we're going to share that. So. There we go. Thanks. So Project Grants is a program that supports a huge amount of activity. We think of projects, in this case, involving new music that is disseminated publicly in some way, either through a performance or a recording. So that means you have to have some sort of performance or recording element in mind, or some way for the work to be heard publicly. You can apply for a range of things, from commissioning fees, musician fees, travel, copying costs, other artist fees, recording costs such as mastering, mixing, studio time, that sort of stuff. That said, we were primarily interested in having our funds going to paying artists directly for their work. So it is less likely that you may be funded for production costs or venue rentals, things like that. We like to think it's a very competitive process, and we want our money to be going to helping the artists we serve as much as possible. With that, we have a few areas that we place special emphasis on and have some dedicated funding towards. We support a large range of activities, but here are a few areas that we definitely have some emphasis in. One is the creation of new work, or commissioning fees. There you go.
Yeah. Right.
This is one of the largest funding areas that we fund. Creation of new work can come in a lot of different forms, but we like to think of it as obviously creating new work. The second is new live music for dance. Third is recording costs. That includes, like I said, studio time, mixing, mastering, that kind of thing, artist fees, etc. This is also one of the largest request areas that we have, which means that the competition for what funding we do have available for this is very, very competitive, and probably one of the most competitive elements of the project grants that we have right now. And lastly, residency and community outreach activities. Applications can come from individuals or organizations. There's no need to have a 501c3 or have fiscal sponsorship. We get a lot of questions about who should be the organizing party. It could really be either the individual or the organization. If it's a composer, you'll want to tag whoever the other party is, either the performers, the ensemble, the venue. If the ensemble is putting in the application, you're going to want to tag the composers or the other artists as part of collaborators as a project. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Request amounts are currently from anywhere from $250 all the way up to $15,000. We're averaging about $5,000 awards at the moment. And as we've done in the past, this year we're continuing to place some special emphasis on smaller requests of $3,000 and below. Basically, it means that maybe about 40% of what we end up awarding will probably be in that $3,000 and below category. Keep in mind that we do provide partial funding, so it's not all or nothing. We try to provide meaningful awards, so we won't go below a certain percentage of the request. just so you're aware. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about the panel process and the criteria that we use. We have a two-stage panel process. It involves the first stage is solely an artistic review. Well, maybe I'm getting there too fast. We have three criteria that we use the panel. It's a peer panel process. We have three criteria that they use when assessing the projects themselves: artistry, impact, and capacity. And artistry is the most important element. We have a two-stage process. The first stage is solely review based around the artistic aspects of the project, and those are the work samples that you submit on your project. So projects primarily go through that. If a project makes it through that stage, then it's moved on to a more full review where a separate panel reviews artistry again, and then impact and capacity. And so what do we mean by those terms? What is artistry? What do we mean by artistry? What do we mean by impact? And what do we mean by capacity? Artistry is probably, by its nature, a matter of interpretation. And there are several ways to think about it. We ask our panelists to think about it in lots of different ways. We actually give them some questions, such as, is the work compelling? Does it compel your interest? Do you want to keep listening or watching it? Does it embody a distinctive or authentic artistic voice? Does it feel fresh, or is it dated in some way? Does the work show highly developed craft or technical excellence? These are some of the things they'll be thinking about when reviewing the work. Also of important notes is panelists are encouraged to explore collaborator profiles for additional media if they feel anything is missing from the main project media area. We only give you space for 3 media samples. So if you have more collaborators or more composers you're working with, make sure that they're tagged as a collaborator and that they have filled out their profile with work samples there as well. Panelists often go looking for additional material if they feel like they don't have enough to assess the project, and that happens a lot. I think once projects that really don't fare that well, or when they don't put as much media as you possibly can on here, that's very helpful. So don't just put up one work sample, put up as many as you can, and use those profiles to your advantage by having media samples there as well. It's very important. The second criteria is impact. We ask our panelists to think about the project as a whole, and in that way, what is the impact on either the participating artists, the composers, the community or audiences involved? Is it particularly meaningful opportunity for the composer community or organization? Does it represent an opportunity to build new relationships or strengthen existing relationships with either audiences, organizations, performers, collaborators, etc.? So we think about it in a broad way, and the panel looks at each project individually for impact, whether it's this is a particularly unique opportunity for a composer, or if it's a very particularly unique opportunity for the organizer or ensemble. It's important in your narrative to talk through some of these things, like why is this project important to you? Why are you working with these artists or these collaborators, and what you hope to get out of it. And lastly, the third criteria is capacity. Panelists don't actually score in this area, but they answer 2 questions. One is basically, can they do it? Yes, no, or maybe. And the second is the request amount appropriate? Yes or no. So when you fill out a budget, that they'll be looking at that to make sure that the request makes sense within line with your budget. And also, just to note, unconfirmed collaborators can also have an impact in this area. So if your collaborators haven't confirmed, please make sure that they do confirm their participation in the project. We sort of think of that as their letter of intent or their letter of agreement to work with you on the project. So make sure that they follow through on that. Collaborators do not have to be confirmed by the deadline, October 1st. They can confirm at any time. But with that in mind, we usually kick off the panel review process about 2 weeks after the deadline. So it's really in your best interest to have them confirm as quickly as possible on or around the deadline or just thereafter. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sam to walk through some of the application itself.
Sure. Let me go to my dashboard. So if you have a profile on our site, you can log in and you'll see your dashboard. These are projects I'm following. If I go over here and click Start a Project, I can get started on a new project. Here are the guidelines, which we've already walked through. Click on that. Okay, so this is the first page in the project form. It's basically gathering all the public information that goes on your project form, like the title. I can name this SAM School Project, and then check the project type it is. So let's say it's a dance project and also a jazz project. And keep in mind that which categories you choose during here determines who's going to review your project. So if I choose dance, then my project is going to be reviewed by a choreographer or a composer who is an expert in the dance field. And similarly, if I click jazz, it's going to be reviewed by an artist who is actively involved in the jazz field and is an expert in that kind of music. So think strategically and keep in mind who's looking at your project by what you check off.
Yeah, I'm going to add one note to that is that especially with projects that involve dance, they are being reviewed by choreographers. So if there aren't any samples, work samples that you have that demonstrate that either the company you're working with or the choreography, well, the choreography, but also I wanted to use a take on that choreography. Thank you. Choreographic, artistic aspects of it. Make sure that you might not want to click dance at that point because the project may end up in the hands of a choreographer who won't know exactly how to review it without having any sort of dance elements to review. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And then moving forward, you choose the start and end date for your project. Prefer that these dates be when the project is culminating. So if the performance for a project is, let's say, in April of 2016, performed April 15th through April 17th or something, then I would choose that. A lot of people use it to convey the entire time period for a project, which is not necessarily what we're looking for. We're sort of looking for when that project is actually going to happen. And something to keep in mind is that the range of supportable activity is about 2.5 years. So we can retroactively support projects that happened up to 6 months before the deadline, so April 1st, 2015. And we can support future projects that are happening up to 2 years after the deadline, so October 1st, 2017. So that is the range of supportable activity for this round. Underneath the dates is the tagline. The tagline is not meant to be used like tags on YouTube or something, so you're not supposed to be like hashtag music, hashtag composer. It's supposed to be something that sums up what the project is about. And actually, if you hover over these question marks, you can see what we're sort of looking for. So that describes what a tagline is. And similarly, this describes what date should be. And there's one for each of the parts of the form. So I'll just say a dance project with jazz, which is pretty bad tagline, but I'm in a rush. Next is the public description for the project, which is essentially where you describe what is happening. The best way to approach this, I think, and I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I think that beginning with a discussion of what is actually happening with the project and then going into a discussion about the impact that the project can have on the artists involved or people indirectly involved or communities is important, especially considering, as Scott mentioned, that during the second and final stage of panel review, panels are reviewing for artistry and impact, and they're essentially on the same level at that point. So it's super important to convey not only the artistry in your project, but also the impact it will have.
Yeah, you want to use this public description as an opportunity to tell us what's happening, where, when, who's involved, if they're not tagged as a collaborator or somehow otherwise involved. So tell us about the project. I mean, give us the details of the project, but then also give us some context behind that. You know, like, where did this come from? Why are you doing it together? Why is it important for you to do it at this point in time and with these people? something that gives us a little bit more to go on about why you're doing it and why we should kind of fund it for you. So those are some things to think about. Think about, like I said, with the impact, we have the review criteria up, so you can come back to these questions at any point and look at that. Another a good tip to do, and this is true of all areas of the project, is have a coworker or a friend or a colleague look at your narrative and ask them to think about it and read through it, and from the perspective of pretending to be a panelist, what does it convey? What did they get? What comes across by reading it? It's a really good activity and will help you refine exactly what you're trying to say and get it as clear as possible.
Yeah. And then following that is the project location. So where the project is happening. So let's say this is going to happen in, I don't know, Evanston, Illinois. So the project is happening here. This is where the performances are taking place. Sometimes projects have multiple locations, which is not easily conveyed by this. In that case, I would just pick maybe the first, explain a little more in the project description. So I can say, will be premiered in Evanston, then performed in Chicago and Detroit. But basically, we just want to know where the project is essentially happening. Yeah. And then you, as the project organizer, who is basically the master of this project page, gets to define your role. So I'm going to say that I'm the composer, and then I have to add collaborators on the project. So if you didn't see in the project description, I essentially said Scott is my dancer. So I'll add Scott, which I can do by searching his name, Scott Winship. There he pops up. So I select Scott, and I name his role as choreographer. And he, once I save this page, will get an email asking him to confirm his collaboration. The next step is uploading a header image, which I'll just do with the New Music USA logo. Ta-da! And it automatically crops so it fits our dimensions. Then I save and go to step 2, and now my project officially is saved on the website. If you don't save prior to that point, then it's not on our website. There's no record of it, so don't.
Yeah. Make sure
you save. Yeah.
Make sure you save.
The next step is to upload media samples, which can be embedded as a YouTube video, Vimeo video, or a SoundCloud player. You can also upload an MP3 or PDF. One thing to note is that while we do have the option for PDFs, it's generally, it makes your project less competitive if you include PDFs. I know it can be sort of, you might want to upload a PDF of a score along with the recording of a score, but then you're using up 2 of your 3 work samples on the same piece, where just the recording may convey the same level of artistry.
Yeah, and definitely what we don't need and what do not help in this situation are PDF images of whatever promotional materials, anything like that. Those are not necessary here, and they're really not helpful for the review. What we really want here is, or whatever we can, that some sort of media sample is something to listen to or watch or hear your work. That's really the most important thing.
And going off of that, we also have seen that projects that include promotional material in the form of videos also generally tend to score poorer.
Yeah, so highlight reels or teaser reels or anything like that usually don't do as well, because the panelists really want to get a sense of a whole work. They want to understand the artistic intent behind a whole work and not just clips and elements of various works together. That's not really the best place for this. The best place for that would be in your profile. If you actually want to include that, put that in your profile. That's fine. But you only have 3 options here, so use them wisely. Think about how you want to do it. How can you best convey the artistic merit of this project that you're hoping to do or have already done it was retro. So make sure you think about it in those ways, and that the panel really want to listen to work. They want to be able to click around. And did you talk about key points too?
Yeah. If you are uploading a video of an entire performance that might be an hour long, we strongly advise you use cue points to point the panelists to where you want them to listen, because the panelists aren't going to sit there and watch an entire hour-long performance. And realistically, the panelists might spend 5 minutes on a single work sample. So just keep that in mind. And you can enter key points in the description. So you can be like, start at 105. And then you can also, on work samples, you can also tag who worked on it. So let's say it's a video of Scott dancing to a piece I wrote. So I wrote the music, Scott's dancing in it, so we both worked on this. And then finally, for a work sample, there's an option to mark it private. Making it private takes it off of the public-facing page. So only panelists can see it or our staff. And if the project's awarded, then it won't be made public. But if you leave this unchecked, it will show up on the public project page if your project is awarded. So let's save that. And then the final part of the project form is the private information, where you enter your budget and just can give us some private notes about the budget or the project itself. As Scott said, you can request between $250 and $15,000. If you request below $1,500, you don't have to provide us with a budget. If you do request more than $1,500, then you do have to provide us with a budget. So let's say I want $10,000, and this comes out, and I can enter artist fees for $5,000 and commission for another $5,000. And then let's say I need to specify, I don't know, what would I need to specify?
The private description is an option, an area for you to provide some additional context that you might not want to have public, whether that's funding, other funding sources that you have either secured or pending, or if there are artists who haven't committed to the project, or venues who haven't committed to the project yet. Basically areas, anything that you think that should not be public at this point, but is important for the panel to be aware of with regards to your project. What usually doesn't work as well is using the private description to give that added context of what the project is. That's usually best done in the public narrative. Mm-hmm. That's really the best place for it. So if you just put only very brief details about your project in the narrative and then talk about why it's important and who you're working with in the private description, it's not quite as exciting or unique or compelling to the panel, because that's not the best use of this private description, really. Really use this area for things that you don't want the public to see, or do you want, but you really think that it's important to have for context. I'm not sure I just said that the right way, but.
And one last thing I would note is that even though the request is $10,000, we typically like to see the whole budget. And it doesn't have to be super specific. It can just be general, like artist fees, commission. And if I do recording, let's say that's $3,000 or something. And then let's say, like, I don't know, any rental. So I have the whole budget, and this is all we really need. And then I have the request separately, and then I can specify in the private description what the request would cover. So the request is for artist fees, and at this point we save again. And if I had uploaded any work samples, I could submit my project. But just note that anytime you can preview your project and see what it looks like in the public facing page. So you'll see that there's my title, there's the dates, the location, the header image, there's me, Scott, an overview of the project, and then here there would be work samples. And just to note that you can't preview the private information because that view is only for the panelists and our staff. And then once you submit the project, you may be wondering what happens. So we created this lovely blog post called What Happens After I Click Submit, which goes into detail where essentially Kristen and Scott, we review all of the submitted projects for eligibility, and then we send them forward to panel. There's generally 30 to 40 peer panelists for the artistic round, and they spend about a month reviewing,
Yeah,
about 4 weeks reviewing about 100 projects each. From there, we make a cut to around 200 projects to move forward to the final panel. At the final panel, there's only 10 to 15 panelists. They're reviewing about 50 projects each. They're given the same amount of time. And then after there, we narrow the projects down to 60 to 70 for award allocation. And then that's where the 12 to 16 weeks goes. I don't know if you have anything to add, Scott.
Just that the panel process itself is, we have like in the artistic review, we have 30 to 35 panelists or so. Each of those folks are working individually and in subset. They get a subset of the application pool, so they're not seeing the whole thing, but they're each getting a subset. And like we said earlier, we use the taggings. The tags that you use when you create your project are very much used in making sure that the panelists are assigned to the appropriate projects for what your project is. So I guess that's the only thing I would add.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we can, in answering questions, unless there's anything you want to touch on.
No, there's none coming in on this end.
All right.
Have it there.
I don't know. So if you are watching, you can ask questions directly on the Google Plus Hangout event page, or else you can email them to info@newmusicusa.org, and we will start answering some.
Happy
Yeah. Any questions you have? I think there's like a 30-second delay. So.
Okay. And
is there anything we should touch on, like commonly asked questions?
sure, yeah.
You
have a few, right?
Yeah. Covered a lot of it in terms of like what goes into the narrative. But I think touch on the 3 projects.
Sure.
I think.
We've had a number of questions recently about folks who have applied in the past and not been awarded. How many times you could keep applying, and applying as you like for your project. That's awarded. We do limit reapplying for the same project, and that would be for like different elements of the same project. We've had in the past who was awarded commission fees and then came back to us around for residency fees around the project. So things like that are allowable up to 3 times for the same. Feel free to apply as often as you can or want to. That's no problem.
Yeah, and I guess just a commonly asked question is, there's multiple projects during the same round. That is definitely allowed. You can be attached to as many projects as you want. Just one thing to keep in mind is that all of the projects are essentially in competition with you. If you are a project organizer and you submit 5 different projects, the likelihood that all 5 will be funded is, but by all means, however many projects you want.
Yeah, the way the panel up in the same, and only if someone's applying or been on a number of projects. So it's usually seen by different panelists, and then in terms of where it may fall in terms of the ranking aspect of it.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things you guys have been tackling for that last couple of days?
I would say that if you've been tagged in a project before or you've organized a project before, when you are asked to confirm your collaboration, you actually already have your username and password, but we've gotten a lot of emails asking why the username and password wasn't given in the email that they were just sent. So if you have been in some sort of project before, you can always go back and log in, and then
Yeah, and even if you don't know your username, you can recover it through the login page with your email address. So it's really easy to get your username, get your password, and then log in and confirm your collaboration. Another question that often comes up is submitting projects and using playlists on SoundCloud for a single work sample. This is something that has happened in the past, and I actually think we're getting rid of that ability. We already got rid of it on YouTube just because the way that it was working is that you would submit a playlist and then it would default to the first video in the playlist, which isn't supposed to happen, obviously. But in terms of SoundCloud, people were submitting playlists with maybe 5 pieces on it for a single work sample, which obviously the panelists aren't going to spend time listening to all of those, and those pieces should have been its own individual work sample or found its way onto the artist's profile. So that's just a note.
Yeah. Let's go over some of the do's and don'ts of work samples, Sam.
Sure.
Since we're talking about work samples now, you have that somewhere, right?
Yep. Okay. Let's chat a bit about how you can ask them to Hangout event page or email them to us at info@newmusicusa.org. This is a great time if you have any questions at all, that whether general or specific to your project, you should feel free to ask us directly. Okay, so let's talk a bit about work samples. You should make sure that your work samples are recent. We actually check for this when we're screening projects, whether or not work samples are recent. By recent, we're thinking 3 to 5 years typically. Probably not something you wrote in the 90s or the 80s, but in the last 5 years or so. You should also think strategically about your work samples you provide in relation to your project. So while the project may be something that's happening in the future, the work samples don't necessarily need to pertain directly to that project, like demos and sketches, which tend to score poorly among panelists because the work isn't finished yet, so they can't get a full understanding of the project. So a better way to approach it is to think about who's involved. So in the case of the example project I made where Scott is a choreographer and I am a composer, I would likely submit my own a work sample for me as the composer that showcases my level of artistry, then another work sample for Scott that showcases his level of artistry, and then a work sample for the performing ensemble or the dance company that's premiering the piece to showcase their level of artistry, so that even though the work, we're not submitting any work samples directly for the work itself, the panelists can sort of get an idea of who's involved and the breadth and level of artistry that is going into this project. And we mentioned before about the cue points, but I would just stress again that you should think about cue points, point panelists to excerpts of the piece. if you have a 20-minute piece, I wouldn't expect the panelists to listen to the entire thing. I'd maybe point them to a 5-minute clip from that. And similarly, even if you post a video to like a 5 or 6 minute piece, I would still provide a cue point if there's things like clapping before a piece begins, or like tuning up, because we just want to make it as efficient as possible for panelists to go to a project, find the cue point, and then listen to the sample without wading through unnecessary things. And then that being said, don't always assume that the beginning is the best place to start. If it's a longer piece, you can definitely excerpt from the middle or near the end. It's just wherever you think the piece can convey the level of artistry that you want to convey to the panelists.
Yeah, it's really just a starting point
Yeah.
for the listening, and that's an important thing to think about, because panelists are going to be going through a lot of different projects and hearing a lot of different work. It's very diverse, and so you really want the first impression for your work samples to be one that you're curating, not one that is just random or something like that. It's like, so you want to provide them a space to start off in the right foot, and then they'll have that option to listen to the whole work or move around or whatever. But this is your opportunity to really direct their listening, and it's an important thing to think about, what you want to convey that best represents you as an artist or your work or the project or whatever. So I would definitely think about that as an important element.
Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about the actual quality of work samples. So I would advise against submitting MIDI realizations, because although it can showcase the piece that's being created, oftentimes it doesn't really come across in MIDI. So avoid MIDI, and even if the piece is done and you want to submit a MIDI realization just to showcase the finished work, I would still suggest that you use previously completed works to showcase your artistry rather than a MIDI realization.
Yeah, MIDI is just very difficult to listen to,
Yeah.
And it doesn't really do the work justice. There are some folks who are really adept at doing MIDI. That may be an exception, but as a general rule, it's usually best and wise to avoid MIDI samples.
Yeah. And then just generally low quality work samples. They don't need to be particularly like professional level work samples, but if you're submitting a video that is like a mono recorded weird pan, like it's only coming out of a left speaker, then that's probably not the best sample that the panelists can use to review the artistry of that piece.
Yeah. Also, with regards to dance samples, usually the wider shots are better. I know that a lot of dance recordings or videos tend to move around a lot, so it's something that gives the panelists the chance to get some stable view of what's happening and the choreography, the intent behind that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We do have one question, Sam, I'm going to
Sure.
throw out, and from Christina Wheeler, who asks if this is going to be able to, if they'll be able to watch this after we're done today, if we're recording it, and that is, yes, we are. We're recording this. Once we're completed with this, we'll have this available on our website. Where else does it live on?
It'll live on YouTube. We also, on our YouTube channel, also exists similar Google Hangouts from the previous 2 rounds. So if there's something we missed here, you can always check back there. And we go through the video and sort of pick out points where we put buttons on the screen that you can click and go to a certain part of the video if you want to.
So specific topics.
Yeah.
Like, then we'll probably put a button on this that talks about narrative. So if you're interested in hearing us talk about what the public narrative and what you should do with that, then we'll have a button on it that you can go to that point in the video. And so you don't have to watch through the whole hour-long thing or however long this ends up being.
Yeah.
So definitely check it out. It'll be on our YouTube channel and YouTube page. We'll also have it on our blog probably, or somewhere on our site, I imagine, right, Sam?
Yep.
So yes, it will definitely be available.
Okay. I think that covers it. What do you think?
Yeah, no questions. We still have a few viewers, but we're not getting too many more questions here. Is there anything else we should cover? We covered work samples, talked about budget.
Yeah. That's good. Just something to note is that we will be holding a few more Q&A sessions. One this Friday, I believe. We're doing a Reddit AMA. So if you're, it's Friday, yeah. So if you're familiar with Reddit or unfamiliar with Reddit, we'll post a link when it goes live, and then you can essentially ask us whatever you want. You don't need an email to register for Reddit. You can just enter whatever you want, which is sort of the easy social networking site. And then on Monday, we are doing a Twitter chat. So you can join us on Twitter, use hashtag PG2015, and we can answer your questions there. That just about covers it.
Yeah, and a couple other things to note before we close out. If you have questions, the best way to reach us is by emailing info@newmusicusa. This is something we all have access to and are actively on and tracking very, very easily. It's unlikely that we'll be able to return as many phone calls as we have in the past or can do now. So really the fastest way to get any questions answered or attention from us would be by emailing info@newmusicusa. Don't forget that the deadline is October 1st, 5 p.m. Eastern. That is a hard deadline. So make sure you do it early. Don't wait till 5 p.m. Your clock might be 2 minutes later than ours. Yeah. So please be sure to do that. There's always a ton of, or several folks after the deadline say, "Oh, I just missed it." Sorry, it's a hard deadline. So with that, I want to thank you, those of you who tuned in, and good luck. And let us know if you have any questions.
Thanks.